Hello. Okay, so today's video is gonna be all about building confidence at work. I am an assistant. I've been an assistant for just under 3 years now, and I am an executive assistant to the CEO of a pretty small company, which means my job is very fast-paced and I'm constantly doing new things. And basically, I think this is true of everyone kind of at the start of their career, because I'm pretty new to my career, but something that was really important for me to figure out right out the gate was building work confidence. And I needed to build work confidence because in order to not be paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake, especially the fear of making a mistake when doing something new, I needed to figure out how to feel really good about the work I was doing and feel more comfortable with making mistakes in order to just perform my job adequately and eventually very well. So if you're someone who struggles with insecurity about the work that they do, this video is for you. I'm gonna go through like 3 things I think that you need to know in order to start building your confidence at work. I should preface this with the fact that I've been working with a coach pretty much since I started my job at this company, and she has helped me a ton. And a lot of this is pulling from the lessons and insights I got from our sessions together, and just kind of the way of thinking and teaching that her and her craft kind of taught me. So with that, I will reintroduce myself. My name's Mackenzie. This is my channel, Think Too Much. Today's video is going to be focusing on the 3 tips that you need to build self-confidence at work. Let's get into it. Okay, so tip number 1, you need to put pen to paper. You need to write down what's going through your head when you're feeling anxious or insecure at work. You don't have to do it right in the moment. I know that I hate doing that. I'm not very good at it. And also when I start writing in a journal, I will not stop. It takes a long amount of time. So if you can't do it while you're on the job, just take note of the anxiety or whatever the unpleasant feeling was when you had it. Take note of it in the moment and then circle back to it later when you have time to journal, and try to figure out what was going through your mind that was driving that uncomfortable feeling. This exercise is super important because this is how you become aware of what your specific insecurities are. And if you don't know what your specific insecurities are, you can't tackle them properly. You can't poke holes in them in the way that you need to in order to overcome them and actually feel really confident in the face of them. So put pen to paper whenever you're feeling a thing, and take a look at what you write down, and you're probably going to be shocked at some of the thoughts that you have about yourself that you're not even consciously aware of, that kind of come out when you just write them all down. And then once you kind of have a starter pack of the specific insecurities that you carry with you at work, then you can start working on them. So I can tell you, for me, one of the insecurities I had at work, and this is something I still struggle with, is making mistakes and feeling anxious or scared to make mistakes. Now it's my fear of making a mistake isn't so much bound up in my thinking that I'm not good at my job. That's coming from some other form of insecurity, but when I started, every mistake I would make made me feel like I was terrible at my job. And then another insecurity I had was this kind of narrative I had about myself that I am a slow worker. This is something that I was probably subliminally aware of, because this is kind of a narrative I've had about myself for a long time, through school, through other jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of knew it was there, but I think it was helpful to get very specific about when that insecurity was rearing its ugly head. That way I could kind of know when to expect it, or just know what environments it manifests within. So if you take nothing else away from this video, put pen to paper, figure out what it is you are insecure about at work, because you can't be confident at work if you don't know which insecurities to dispel first. That's just it. And I will also say, I don't think this is the kind of thing that's one and done. Once you figure out your work insecurities, you're good for life. Your work insecurities are probably going to keep evolving and manifesting in new ways over time. So this exercise, honestly, never stops being useful. So once you've written down and gotten granular about what your insecurities are at work, you can start to tackle them, right? So tip number 2 is starting to poke holes in the narratives you have about yourself that aren't serving you. So for example, the narrative I had about myself that making mistakes made me bad at work, or just made me somehow bad at my job, or the number of mistakes I was making was making me, I don't know, particularly unsuited for my role. That wasn't a very helpful thought, but it was one that kind of plagued me when I first started working. I have been working with a coach pretty much the entire time I've been working at this company, and one of the things that she said to me that just really was such a light bulb moment was she encouraged me to try to kind of look at all the things that I think that I do incorrectly Like, right, I think I do them too slowly, or I should be doing this, but I'm doing this instead. Look at all of the things that like my brain is like shaming me for doing incorrectly, and try to find evidence that like the way that I am doing things is actually correct, right? So it's just kind of like a subversion exercise that like I still find super useful. And honestly, like, I think you'd be surprised that even just like asking yourself that hypothetical question, like, what is it that I am doing right here? Or like, what about the way that I do this is accurate and right? Just like even asking that question is probably going to open up your mind to like all of these alternative possibilities for like how to think about the way you do your job. Your brain is probably pretty used to kind of giving you the same criticisms over and over again. And like, you think that you're just stuck with them. And like, those are thoughts that you have about yourself, but like, you would be surprised what getting curious and asking questions like this will do to kind of like open your mind to like other more confident possibilities. So if you think that you do a specific thing in like the wrong way, try the exercise of asking yourself, okay, but like, what about this am I doing right? And just see what comes up. Allow your thought process to be creative, problem solve, figure out like what it is you're doing right. You could probably list at least one or two. And I'll give you like a concrete example of this. This one actually is not work related. I think she gave me the prompt and I was like pleasantly surprised by the fact that my brain just kind of ran with it. Like I said, it really clicked. So I found that I was thinking about it kind of in relation to all parts of my life. So this specific example was like, I have a history of being self-critical of like the number of books that I read, or I should say the number of books that I don't read. So it was kind of funny. Like I just had this prompt in my head and it just kind of clicked one night when I was reading a nonfiction book, and I was reading it kind of slowly as I usually do. And I wanted to end a chapter and stop reading for the night. And I was starting to feel self-critical about that. And then this prompt kind of like popped into my head, and it kind of occurred to me like, oh, like I like to read nonfiction slowly because I like to comprehend what's happening, and I want to make sure I have like a thorough understanding of like all of the information that they just gave me before I move on to the next set of information, because like I really want to understand this concept. I picked up this book because I was interested in knowing more about it, and I don't want to just get through a book for the sake of getting through the book. I want to read this book so I can absorb the information. So yeah, this tip is super useful and kind of starting to poke holes in like the negative narratives you have about yourself, especially at work, but honestly in all parts of your life. It's a prompt that will continue to be useful to you. It's a fun exercise, and I think once you start to get in the practice of it, you'll be like pleasantly surprised at like how often your brain kind of plays with the hypothetical, like, oh, what about this am I doing correctly? And I think that once you kind of get into the habit of that and you associate it with like good positive feelings, you'll just start to do it more naturally. So what I'm trying to say by saying you need to zoom out is saying that like you need to give yourself some perspective in those moments when you're feeling kind of down on yourself. And that will either come in the form of like zooming out and like trying to look at it from the perspective of like the specific nature of your role, or it'll come in the form of like zooming out to really humanize what happened if you made a mistake, for example. So just to take the second one, like if you were to zoom out and imagine that like your colleague had made the same mistake that you had, or your colleague had done the same thing that you had, and you were to try to imagine like how you would think about them in the face of that mistake and or action, how might you give them grace that you are not giving yourself right now? I mean, if you're like me, you can be really self-critical, and with self-criticism, it can be really easy to forget to give yourself grace. So imagining someone else that's in your position and like how you might think about them, how you might humanize them, might give you clues as to how you could do that for yourself and give yourself that same grace. Another way you could zoom out, and this is kind of a favorite of mine, questioning the nature of your role and questioning how the specific circumstances that like you are operating within may have contributed to the inevitability of like a mistake, or just like the way you did something, etc., etc. I mean, and I even said at the beginning of this video that it's like I am an assistant, and at some point I had the thought, and this was a very helpful thought, that like I do a lot of new things all of the time, and because of that, mistakes are just like pretty inevitable. And I just find that like because I was able to zoom out and kind of give myself that grace in that moment, kind of humanize the error in that moment, it's just something that like pops into my head oftentimes when I feel that like initial jolt of anxiety every time I make a mistake. It's like, well, wait a minute. This thing was entirely new to me. And because this thing was entirely new to me, it feels fully comprehensible that like a mistake was made. And if anything, I like will flip it around and turn it into a confidence builder. I'll be like, I am amazed this mistake didn't happen sooner. Or I'm amazed that like this was the only mistake that came of this. It's like a really great way to kind of flip the script on yourself. And the third way to kind of like zoom out, and this is also just like a really helpful tool to have in your back pocket, and it's specific to mistakes. When you make a mistake, zoom out, right? Get out of the nitty gritty of the mistake and wanting to fix it immediately. Stop trying to fix it. Take a moment, breathe, maybe write some shit down if you're emoting, and then just think about like, what's the solution? Just start problem solving. I could tell you that like one of the biggest and like quickest confidence builders for me at my job was when I learned that like when I get bad feedback or like when I make a mistake, if I turn around and figure out how to improve my process and communicate that process improvement to my boss, all of a sudden I feel like a badass. It's just a great way to kind of like flip the script on like something that's usually kind of hurtful to your confidence at work and turning it into kind of like something that makes you feel really good about your performance at work, right? Because like your boss is probably gonna be happy because you've proactively taken the steps to figure out how not to make that mistake again, or to like lessen the likelihood of that mistake. For example, you identified what went wrong, you probably provided some sort of solution for it, and you kind of provided a framework for making sure that like the likelihood of that sort of mistake happening again is much lower. And like, I don't know, when I hear that, I hear that's a great employee. And I think what's so great about that in particular is that like, it's just kind of taking a moment that could otherwise feel really bad and make you feel really crappy and actually making you feel really good. And honestly, it's like the more confident you feel at work, the less fearful you are of mistakes, the more like badass you feel and like what you're doing, like the better you're gonna do. You're going to be less paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. You're gonna be less in your head when you're like doing the work. And when you're more clear-headed, you're just better able to anticipate things. So that is the third tip, and that sums up my quick and dirty guide for building confidence at work. These all really helped me, but like I said, I've been at this job for a little bit under 3 years. I started kind of working on this confidence building almost immediately after starting, and I probably didn't come to a place where I was feeling like fully confident until a year and a half, 2 years in. Like it takes a while, and you gotta know yourself, you gotta be willing to do the work. But I guess most importantly to keep in mind is like, once you do this, it will make work feel better. It'll make work feel more fun, and it'll probably kind of make you open to and like creatively interested in opportunities that you may have otherwise felt unqualified for. And with that, I'm gonna go back to work because I did this during my lunch break, so gotta show up to work to feel confident at work, right? That's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. A lot of what I put out is content like this, or it's content that's just like thinking through like your 20s in general. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.